So my name's Mark Edwards. I'm a Professor of Neurology at St George's University of London. So I'm working in London in the UK. So my journey with dystonia started what's now a long time ago in around 2001 when I went to the National Hospital for Neurology in London to start my junior training in neurology, and I was lucky enough to meet some really inspiring movement disorder specialists there, particularly Professor Kailash Bhatia, Neil Quinn, Andrew Lees, John Rothwell, and they inspired me to get into movement disorders, this branch of neurology, and in particular to study dystonia. So that took me on to doing my PhD, trying to understand brain mechanisms of what goes wrong in the brain, I suppose, in people with dystonia. And I was studying a particular genetic type of dystonia called DYT1. So that was a very intense period of research. But then after that, I continued my interest clinically in movement disorders, always having a passion for understanding more about dystonia, trying to help people with dystonia. And I've continued that really to date. So I continue to see people with all different types of dystonia. I have particular areas of interest around musicians' dystonia and also functional dystonia. And I'm particularly interested in those areas because there's a possibility of rehabilitation as a main treatment. And that's something that I'm particularly interested in generally in dystonia. I think rehabilitation is kind of a logical treatment for dystonia because what we think goes wrong in the brain in dystonia is that somehow there's mislearning by the brain of connections. And so when people then try and move, the wrong movement comes out. And so it makes sense that maybe, at least theoretically, you could retrain that system. And there's an idea about a particular important system in the brain called brain plasticity, which is the ability of the brain to basically change in response to signals that it's getting. So that's how we learn to walk or do anything really. I suppose as a neurologist, my main role is in diagnosis, so trying to diagnose dystonia, but also probably more importantly to try and work out what the cause of the dystonia is, because dystonia is such a heterogeneous condition, so meaning there's lots of different ways in which people end up with dystonia, and knowing what the cause is can really help in terms of counselling people about what to expect in the future, deciding on what treatments might be most useful or not useful. So for example, deep brain stimulation surgery can be really useful, but in certain types of dystonia and not in everybody. So those sort of diagnostic categorization sort of things are quite important. But then I'm interested in sort of delivering treatment as well. So in terms of botulinum toxin, and I work with a great DBS team, deep brain stimulation team as well. So, and also with physiotherapy. So if we think about types of dystonia or causes of dystonia, there's a big categorization, which is that there's a group of people who have what is called isolated dystonia. So in them, they just have the dystonia. It can be very severe, but they don't have anything else apart from the abnormal postures and the tremor, which often goes with it. So for example, they don't have memory problems, or they don't have eye movement problems, or they don't have other things. So it's, if you like, pure dystonia. And typically that's a genetic problem. Not always, but it can be. And then there are different genetic causes that one might look at. And they're also, people tend to remain pretty static over time, so it doesn't inexorably get worse. On the other side, there are people who have degenerative problems with the brain, so that the nerve cells are failing because there's a process stopping them working in the brain. And dystonia happens, but then often people get other problems as well. So they might have a combination of dystonia with other movement problems or other medical problems as well. And usually that's a process that gradually gets worse over time. And there's one other quite big category of people where something has happened to the brain in terms of an injury or accident. So a classic one is sort of loss of oxygen around birth, which can give people what's usually called cerebral palsy. Or people might have a stroke, or they might have MS, or they might have a brain injury. And as part of that, they develop dystonia. In the end, the movement problem can look quite similar, but the causes are different, and often the prognosis, the end result, is different, and also the treatment is as well. And so it's trying to do the right kind of investigations to understand what the cause is and to help, explain to people what that is and what treatment might be best. Often we're thinking just about treatment. So I say, oh, you've got cervical dystonia, I'm going to give you botulinum toxin. But that really doesn't say anything about the person in front of you, because it's really just all about, the diagnosis, cervical dystonia equals botulinum toxin. So people are very, very different, and there are some people where, for example, anxiety is a major part of their problem. They may have cervical dystonia, that's true, but the psychological impact of it has been enormous. And maybe some people might not think that's the thing to talk to a neurologist about, because a neurologist is just there to give botulinum toxin, for example. But I think those things are an equally important part of all of this. I think that if you were trying to design a perfect system to help people with chronic neurological problems of all sorts, you would have something which tried to combine neurological expertise in the more traditional things that neurologists might do, like, for example, medication, botulinum toxin, thinking about TBS, with expertise from the psychological side or psychiatric side in terms of dealing with the way that this affects the way that people feel, and with expertise from a sort of holistic side, from using physical and psychological techniques to improve function. But I think that that's something that could be of great benefit to people with dystonia and people with lots of other chronic neurological problems. I think it's possible sometimes to put that together by having an interested neurologist, having access to psychological support, which might be not formal support, but from family or others, or support groups like patient organisations, and finding an interested physiotherapist and trying to sort of put that together yourself, along with things that you can learn to do in terms of what's usually called self-management, in terms of the way you approach your day-to-day life, the way you look after yourself in general, and in a sense trying to use all that to gain control again. So you have a situation with an illness where you're taken out of control, and this is about trying to get that back again to the extent that it's possible. There's an idea that by accepting some things as they are and trying to divert attention onto what is possible to do to still give meaning to your life, that is a way to sort of overcome some of the effects of having a chronic illness. It's an extremely easy thing to say, to do. It's a very hard thing to actually do. But that's where having support from that point of view within a team could be a way of helping. So I think if I was to give some advice to a person with dystonia or their relative or caregiver sort of just after diagnosis, I think it's recognising that you're not alone and that there are other people who have been through this before, and that actually other people with dystonia can be a very, very good source of advice and information about dystonia itself. Everybody is different, and there are many types of dystonia, but sort of seeking out that community, I think, is a good way to start. The other bit of advice is that if you're not satisfied with the treatment you're getting, you need to tell people about it. As a doctor, sometimes it's difficult because maybe maybe things are quite busy, maybe things haven't gone well that day. And so if you're not getting, if your doctor is not giving you the information that you need or not answering your questions, you need to flag that up to that person. If you flag it up to that person and they don't respond, then maybe you need to find another doctor. But I think this communication is a really, really important thing. And remember that doctors are humans as well. They can get things wrong, they can misunderstand things. And so making sure that you're confident enough to have those conversations, say, even write down things before your appointment. This is what I would like to talk about. Because you need to find people that you can have that long-term relationship with from a medical point of view. And that's a very important part of living with the condition.